These are the holy knights of a grand and sacred kingdom. On the battlefield, they are treated as divine authority made visible. So today, I'm going to design them and figure out what it actually looks like when holiness is translated into armor. This isn't just about making armor that looks cool, it has to feel like something sacred enough to represent a god, but still functional enough for knights to fight, kill, and enforce the kingdom's will. By the end, I want to see if those two ideas can actually coexist. Before I lock anything in, I start by sketching immediately to get a feel for the direction. At this stage, I'm not trying to define everything perfectly, I'm just trying to see what holy armor starts to look like in practice. These knights are the standing army of the Holy Kingdom in my comic world, but they're more than just soldiers. They're the closest physical representation of divine authority on the battlefield, so visually, they need to feel like three things at once: grand, holy, and still capable of violence. But I don't fully define what that looks like yet. I let the sketches start answering that question. I began calibrating the general direction through quick iterations. An early idea pushed toward an elite silhouette, which naturally led me toward designs featuring capes and more ceremonial head shapes. From there I started experimenting with more explicitly holy elements. Now, do you notice something about the design? If you said the capes look suspiciously wing-like, you'd be correct. I actually borrowed that idea from the Vagrant's design. It does two useful things. First, it reinforces the theme of divinity in the most literal way possible, without turning every character into an actual angel. And second, it helps tie these designs back to the same visual language, making them feel like they belong to the same kingdom rather than completely separate concepts. While these ideas work well on paper, they introduce a new problem. Not that capes would be impractical, because that has never stopped a character designer before. Rather, the design started to lean too far into holy, and in doing so, it began to lose the sense of fierceness. If these knights are meant to represent divine authority in war, they can't just look sacred. They also need weight, discipline, and a sense that they can enforce that divinity through force. To correct that, I pushed the design in a more grounded direction, darkening the wing shapes and reintroducing more facial coverage. At that point, the design was mostly working, so the remaining iterations were about refinement. I made the armor the brightest part of the design, pushed the cape into a more triangular silhouette, exaggerated the wing shapes so they remain visible from a distance, and limited the palette to three main colors. So when it comes time to draw groups of these knights, my wrists don't fall off. At this point, I thought I had already found a design I was satisfied with. But I've learned that with character design, that feeling is often a bit misleading. If something still feels important, I usually step away from it for a while and come back later with fresh eyes. And more often than not, I end up noticing a better direction, sometimes even when it looks completely different from what I originally liked. Compared to the earlier version, this one feels less clunky and more intentionally divine, with the shapes doing more of the work in guiding the eye through the design. With a satisfying direction in place, it was time to move on to the helmet design. There seems to be a bit of a trend in fantasy media to design helmets based on bird features, and with this design I'm certainly no stranger to that. It looks elegant, flows nicely with the form, and avian features are often associated with the divine in one way or another. Before moving on to the next stage of the design, there was still one important piece missing. A sword. Fantasy swords are arguably some of the biggest victims of the rule of cool, so it's easy to get carried away with oversized blades and elaborate decorations. Not that I'm judging. But for this design, the sword wasn't supposed to steal the spotlight. Its job was to reinforce the knight, not compete with the armor. So I kept the silhouette clean and elegant, opting for a narrow pointed blade paired with a wing-shaped crossguard that echoed the rest of the design. While the rough sketch gathered all the key components, it was time to see how they functioned as a complete design. The first step was establishing a pose that reinforces the angelic authority already present in the silhouette. Even at this stage, the large plumes and wing-like cape naturally guided the direction of the pose, almost extending it rather than sitting on top of it. With the overall structure in place, I moved on to the color. At this point, the focus was simply on what would best reinforce the identity of the design. Warm off-whites and gold felt like the most fitting choice here, since they've been historically used to communicate both nobility and divinity. With the designer fully established, there was nothing left to add on to it. Only one question remained: how would it feel once brought into its final form? It was time to move on to the final render. I started by searching for a scene that could properly frame the holy authority build-up throughout the design. To achieve that, I chose a composition that places the knight within a stone archway, creating a natural framed structure around the character. This approach was inspired by historical portraits of nobility, where framing and symmetry were often used used to reinforce status and presence. With the composition established, I moved on to color and environmental structure. The sky and ambient light around the stone arc were pushed toward a strong contrasting blue, helping the armor separate clearly from the background. In contrast, the clouds were given a warm golden tint to reinforce the established sense of divinity within the scene. With the lighting set, the knight is now placed under strong backlight, allowing the silhouette and armor shapes to read clearly while maintaining a sense of authority. From there, all that remained was refinement and final rendering. After translating the idea of holiness into armor through every stage of the process, this is the final result. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, I would really appreciate a sub as it helps a lot in these early stages of the channel. That being said, see you in the next one. Bye bye!